This episode is brought to you by Nespresso and Samra Origins by the Weekend Coffee Collection.
Introducing Samra Origins. My collaboration with Nespresso is a connection to my roots, to my mother, Samra. Coffee that hits the right notes. It transports you. Crafted with unique notes and bold, soaring flavors. Experience a taste that moves you. Nespresso and Samra Origins.
Discover more at Nespresso.com.
Dominic Carter, Talk Radio 77 WABC. Democrats from President Biden on down have called on Governor Andrew Cuomo of New York to resign. Cuomo has flatly denied touching anyone inappropriately, though he has apologized for actions he categorized as making women feel uncomfortable. One of the top Democrats calling for Governor Cuomo to resign is the chair of the New York State Democratic Party, Jay Jacobs. Mr. Chair, thank you for joining us right now.
Thank you for having me.
You are a longtime ally of Governor Cuomo. How tough was it for you to call on him to resign?
Well, it was very difficult. The governor and I have a long and strong relationship. I've been working with him and very pleased at the work we've been able to do together. And we've had, a tremendous experience here. He's been, in my judgment, an excellent governor. Other than this dark chapter, frankly, he's done so much for the state. So it was a very difficult conversation. And, it was tough for me to have it.
You spoke to the governor privately, and obviously you're not going to go through a full private conversation. But in a nutshell, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Governor Cuomo feels that he's innocent. Did he express that to you?
Yeah, well, he feels that he's got his side of the story to tell and that he did not do anything inappropriate, and that's his view. My sense to him that I articulated was that I thought there was just too much to overcome. And I didn't think that there were sufficient answers to many of these allegations or numbers of these allegations. I saw them as 4 really serious allegations. The others I don't mean to diminish, but touching someone on the cheek at a party or kissing them on the forehead, and the governor's kissed me. So I mean that's just the governor, and that part I don't think would have gotten him. That was it alone. I don't think that would have caused him to have to leave office. It was those 4 other individuals who had very serious allegations. And I said the last of them was frankly the state trooper who was part of his protective detail. That I just don't know how he overcomes that one. And I thought that was sexual harassment. I don't think there's any other way to define that. And that's a real problem.
Mr. Chair, it's interesting you point out that the governor has kissed you, because I can tell you that he's also done the same to me many times and given me bear hugs. But is there any way politically that Governor Cuomo can survive this?
No, I don't believe so. And I don't mean to be, so absolute on the matter, but I look at the numbers. There are more than enough assembly members in the Democratic delegation, forget the Republicans, to vote a bill of impeachment, which would then send it to the Senate. Once the governor is impeached by the assembly, he is automatically removed, at least temporarily, and the lieutenant governor serves as acting governor. In the Senate, I will tell you, it is overwhelming. He'll get far more than the requisite 2/3 of the senators, and it's a joint body of the Senate and the Court of Appeals. So, I think you need 46 votes there. Well, he's got that in the Senate, just among the senators. So I just don't see, how he survives this.
Is it possible that the assembly doesn't go forward with impeachment?
Well, I don't see that. Having talked to members of the assembly, I just don't see it. I see the members of the assembly angry about the facts here. I see them having come out publicly, many of them calling for resignation. And so I don't see that there's a chance. And the top leadership that he always depended upon, Carl Hastie, who I respect enormously, is the Speaker of the Assembly, has said the governor needs to resign. as has Crystal Peoples-Stokes, who's the majority leader, African-American woman who's been so impactful on gaining support for the governor in the African-American community, particularly among women. She has now come out and said that he should resign. And that, I think, was a tremendous blow to any chance that he had of surviving in the assembly.
One of the governor's top aides, Melissa DeRosa, resigned, calling the past 2 years trying. Is it inevitable, and I know you've talked about this, but is it inevitable that the governor must step down?
When you lose Melissa DeRosa, who is his top lieutenant, she was secretary to the governor, and the term secretary doesn't really, in normal parlance, doesn't explain the role. It's more like chief of staff. It is the person who executes on behalf of the governor all of the orders that he gives and puts things together for him. She's an enormously important person in a position. She's also a very close advisor, someone that he trusts, someone very effective in getting things done. When she decides to resign, what that means is, in her best judgment, she can no longer serve the governor well. She, in all likelihood, and I'm speculating here, disagrees with him on the course that he should take. And my guess is she probably at this point sees there's no other outcome, no other possibility but that he must resign. And given that maybe he wasn't ready to do so yet, she made her last effort and then did so herself.
Again, the governor, Andrew Cuomo, has adamantly denied any wrongdoing and cast the independent probe by fellow Democrat State Attorney General Letitia James as biased and politically motivated. You are the chair of the state party, Mr. Jacobs. Is there anything to be said for that?
Well, I don't want to get into the back and forth between the governor and the attorney general. I think that the report, when you read it, is professionally done. Can there be those who pick apart, what was included and what was not included? Perhaps. But I think the more important issue, the overwhelming issue, is not the process of creating the report, but the facts in it that are not being disputed. And I go back to the state trooper, and I'm not hearing anything to dispute the state trooper's account, which, by the way, was corroborated by a second trooper who saw some of the alleged activity and behavior. And that in and of itself, I think, seals the deal, unfortunately, for the governor. So, we can argue back and forth on process, but to what end? The facts are the issue that I think, will carry the day.
State Chair Jacobs, what can you tell us about Lieutenant Governor Kathy Hochul? If she is to step in, she would become the first woman governor of the state of New York.
That's right. And that's historic. But I think even more important than that, she'll be an excellent governor. And I think that, she's eminently qualified, very well prepared. She has been preparing for this during the 2 terms as lieutenant governor that she has served. She knows about every department. She understands the budget process and the various agencies, as I said, departments that make up state government. She knows all of the players in Albany and around the state. She's been to all 62 counties. She doesn't need a report on the lay of the land, so to speak. When it comes to running the state, she knows the county executives, the mayors, many members of local councils, et cetera. And she knows the issues. And I think she's also got the right temperament to lead the state at this time and, begin getting us moving forward again.
Mr. Chair, I close this way. Is there any way that Governor Cuomo finishes his 3rd term, possibly negotiates to finish his 3rd term, and then ride off into the sunset? Is there any way that he concludes this 3rd term?
I wish for him personally that I could say yes. I know how painful this must be for him. This job, he loved the job. It had a legacy to it that started with his father, which, who he admires so very much. And there's a certain humanity that we have to remember in all of this. There's a human element. As angry as anyone may be at this dark chapter in the governor's tenure in office, you have to remember that he's tried to do an awful lot of good and has done an awful lot of good. And this, from a human standpoint, is important to him. I see no way that, unfortunately, he can continue in his term much past the next couple of weeks. So, I've been urging him for the preservation of his legacy, of all the good works that he's done, that leaving in a dignified fashion at this time, head up, state your case, but then, vacate the place. I mean, he's just got to leave office and begin the next chapter of his life.
Mr. Chair, I conclude this way, but you of all people know that that's not in Governor Cuomo's DNA, just like it's not much in President Trump, former President Trump's DNA. So I want you to respond to that. And in conclusion, is there anything that I did not ask you regarding this scenario that as the state Democratic chair you feel needs to be in the public domain?
Well, let me respond to the DNA issue. You remember back in 2002, Andrew Cuomo was engaged in a very contentious primary to be governor against Carl McCall, who I believe
I remember it well
at the time. And as we and there were racial overtones in that race that were very unfortunate, and I think on his part unintended. But as you got closer to the primary, the poll numbers were consistent, and Andrew Cuomo saw that he could not win, that the outcome was going to be inevitably against him. And what he did then was sometime before the primary, I think about a week before the primary, he actually withdrew from the race. And so I see parallels here where he sees that all options are foreclosed. He looks at the reality of the situation, and rather than, carrying it all the way down to the very end with conviction in the Senate, he steps aside. So I think in his DNA, there is that possibility. And really, I think we have covered it to the best that I can. I will just tell you that the Democratic Party is strong. People have said to me, well, will the Republicans use this against Democrats running in November or the following year, the governor's transgressions? And I said, no, they can't possibly use this. They have no standing, because these very same Republicans who have perked their heads up now and want to talk about the governor's issues, were like Rip Van Winkle sleeping under a tree during all of Trump's travails, including allegations of rape and other things that he did. You didn't hear peep from these very same people. So now how can they possibly, raise their heads and have anything to say about anything that this governor did? I think you'd have to spell hypocrisy in capital letters to in any way categorize that kind of behavior. So I think they have to sit down and pick up on a different issue for the next election. This won't help them, not with their past.
State Democratic Chair Jay Jacobs, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. And folks, you can catch my WABC podcasts here and also join me on the radio weeknights Monday through Friday, midnight to 1 a.m. on Talk Radio 77 WABC.